That took a lot out of me. Maggie was a solid test of my skills, but I think it's about time for something a little simpler, a little less daunting. Also, now that my channel is finally live and I'm actually uploading these videos, I gotta start playing the YouTube game. According to many people out there, it helps, especially if you're new, to start pandering to making videos about or including cute things. Now, cute isn't really my style, but if I have a chance to appease Al Gore and his sick rhythm by injecting some painfully cute imagery into my video to get people watching, I'll give it a go. But this channel can't survive on clickbait alone, so there's really only one thing I can do. I gotta sculpt something cute. But it has to be something that makes sense. Something that still fits the theme of the channel. Maybe something that Capcom themselves seems to have forgotten all about lately. But then I remembered that this isn't a Mega Man channel, so how about I sculpt a POOGIE instead? That's right, everyone's favorite onesie-wearing sussy baka of a porcine pal would make the perfect addition to my collection, so why not? And yes, I named mine Kevin Bacon, what of it? Now, I'm not going to worry about a sketch for this one, because I think I can do it freehand. Come to think of it, I don't even think I need an armature. I think the foil itself will be enough support on its own. So I stack a whole bunch of it like a snowman and move things into position. Then I wrap it all up with one last sheet of foil to make this lumpy baked potato. I think I was able to mimic the posture just right, but I wrap it a few more times just to make sure everything is nice and secure. Once that's done, I start poking holes and adding simple wires where the limbs are gonna go. This is pretty much the only place I think wire is needed. Sure, it's all pretty loose, but remember, this isn't for support of the piece, it's more of a guide for where the limbs will be placed later. Then I move on to my base layer of Sculpey 3. As usual, it doesn't need to look pretty, it's just there to lock things down and act as a base for everything else I do. Once it's baked, this is what I'm left with. And yeah, I know it doesn't look like much, but everything feels solid and that's good enough for me. However, I will take the time to smooth out some of the larger divots to make life easier. Just gonna take some clay and shove it in the holes until it's mostly flush with the rest. While I'm at it, I'm gonna start bulking up and rounding out certain areas to create a sense of an underlying anatomy. Then, I move on to the head sculpt. Now, I should probably note, I'm basing this more off the Monster Hunter World version of POOGIE. This sketch that I found online is more of a pose reference than anything else. I start by applying a whole bunch of bacon bond to the base of the neck, and then apply a fresh, thin layer of clay to make adding the rest easier. Now that I have a base to work off of, I can begin shaping things out. I just press on huge globs of clay until he looks like some sort of depressed puppy. Then I start carving away the puppy's face until I find the POOGIE hiding underneath. It's like a metaphor for life, or something. Once I'm pleased with the overall shape, I can begin smoothing things out. This took a while, not gonna lie. Once I'm happy with the shape of the snout, I give him a little hat, smooth that down to elongate the forehead. With the head shape down, I then hollow out the eye holes to make way for, well, the eyes. I get the eyeballs in there, and I'm kinda digging it. Then I add the eyelids, and things just kinda fall apart. I'm not sure what it is or why, but something just didn't look right to me. And try as I might, I just couldn't get this to a point where I was happy. It didn't matter which reference I used either. Something just seemed off. So I started over and over. I remade the eyes a bunch of times. Spent all day trying to get it just right and it just wouldn't happen. But eventually, I hit the point of good enough and decided just to go with it. Then I started thinking to myself, maybe if I start adding more POOGIE-like features, it'll look better. So I did just that. I started hollowing out the nose, and I even made some quick makeshift ears to see if that would help things at all. And you know what? It kind of worked. So I decided to move on. I start by adding the legs. It's very simple, very low detail, which, by the way, is what I'm going for with this sculpt. So if you're saying to yourself, hey, why doesn't that pig have a mouth? Well, that's why. You gotta remember, I'm not sculpting a pig, I'm sculpting a POOGIE. And if the lazier side of me can take some intentional shortcuts, you better believe I will. Where was I? Oh yeah, the legs. Do I even need to explain this? But once they're done, I bake it one more time and I move on to creating the patented POOGIE onesie. So I roll out a whole bunch of Sculpey 3 on about the medium thickness setting on my pasta machine. That's right, I'm using the cheap stuff for this for 2 reasons. 1, it blends really well, and 2, it's very soft. These will both come into play shortly. Once I have the head sufficiently covered, I can cut out and mold it to a more natural form-fitting look. Then, I just apply large sheets to the rest of the body and smooth out any creases I come across. Not totally smooth, mind you, so it's okay that it looks a bit messy. I then wrap the feet, much like I wrapped the head, and proceed to round out any noticeable anatomy to create a more final shape. Oh, and then I carved out ear holes, which ended up being pointless in the end, so I'm skipping it. Now I move on to the detail. Remember when I said I'm basing this sculpt off the Monster Hunter World version of POOGIE? Well, that's because the POOGIE of the original game was a little too low detail. I didn't want the entire piece to be completely flat, and the onesie from World had a nice fluffy look to it, which I really liked. So I'm gonna try and mimic that with a texture stamp. And after a lot of trial and error, I settled on using a roll of medical gauze that I had lying around the house. The thinking being that it's just rigid enough to get the detail down, but also spongy enough that it won't distort anything that I don't want to distort. So I gave it a shot and I really enjoyed the results. Oh, and as a bonus, it also cleaned and smoothed out all those leftover seam lines that I didn't bother with before. This worked out great. I had to make sure I get into every little nook and cranny too, so I improvise a little bit here and there. And just like that, after not much time at all really, this is where I'm at. I'm definitely happy with this, but I'm not done yet. First, I want to bake it so I don't mess any of it up. Once baked, I can add the flap that completes the illusion of the onesie. I pretty much just repeat the previous steps as before, making sure to smooth out one side to make it as seamless as possible. Then, it's just a matter of adding the slits for buttons, and then adding said buttons. The buttons themselves are pretty simple. Just roll a ball, smush them down with a tool, poke some holes, and weave a very thin piece of clay between them. Once done, I attach it to the model. I did this 5 times. Then, to better simulate the material, I use the shaper tool to lift up one side a bit to add dimension. Then I move on to the ears. Again, simplicity is key. I'm not going for anything realistic, so I keep them fairly low detail. I make sure to test them out on the head as I go, just to see the results before moving on, adjusting when needed. The ears are kinda on the thin side though, so I'm gonna add support so they don't droop in the oven. I just do a little bit of open ear surgery and place an armature wire inside. I do this twice, and I was able to get the two looking fairly similar. I'm happy with that. Now it's time to make my mark, drill some holes, and attach them to the head. And there you go. I gotta say, for the first time in this project, I can actually say with confidence, this looks like POOGIE. I'd say for about 90% of this project so far, I was totally unsure if this sculpt would even work out, but it seems my wait and see approach actually worked out in the end. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't skeptical this whole time. For the tail, I figured I'd be using some armature wire, but this ended up being a dud, so be glad I'm not showing it. Instead, I thought I'd try something a little new. Enter Cosclay, a fairly new type of polymer clay on the market that is exactly what it says on the box. When it cures, it has the feel of a more bendy plastic or rubber, as opposed to Super Sculpty, which is more like traditional clay that turns into a brittle rock. As such, I'm able to roll out a very thin worm of clay and coil it like a pig's tail, all without use of an armature wire. And once it's baked, you can do this to it. Just try doing this with regular clay, and trust me, it's a one-way ticket to Snap City, Population U. This stuff rocks, and I will definitely be using more of it in the future. The last thing I need to do is make the bow that adorns Poogie's tail. Because it's so small, I'm going to use Cosclay again. Just going to roll some out on the very thinnest setting possible, and start creating something that kind of resembles a bow? Yeah, I don't know, it's really difficult working this small, and I've never done this before, so at the end of the day, you take what you can get. And with that done, so is the sculpt. So let me get this in the oven one last time, and we'll start painting. I start by applying a white base coat to all the buttons and all the remaining extremities. The tail, the legs, and the head. Now I know what you're thinking. Sculptor, why are you painting the already white onesie white? Well, as a general rule of thumb, when it comes to painting, paint generally has an easier time sticking to other paint than clay. I do this for better coverage when I start using color. And speaking of color, I'm deciding to go with the two-tone blue version of Poogie's onesie as opposed to the more classic blue and white. I mean, this is based on Monster Hunter World after all, and these two colors also look really good next to each other, so I went with it. But first I draw on some simple guidelines to sort of plan out where everything's gonna go. Then I mask off certain parts of the face, which ended up being more trouble than it was worth, but I did it anyway. Then I got started with the light blue. I wanted to try to do one color at a time so I wouldn't have to keep switching, so I decided to adjust and paint over my guidelines so I could just keep going. Once the light blue was done, I moved on to the darker blue, making sure to be a little messy where the colors met, as to better simulate the fluffiness of the material. Trust me, it looks better from afar. But this definitely worked out, and I'm very happy with the results I was able to get. And on top of that, I really liked the way the natural light reacted with this texture. The natural shadows added a ton of depth that I really hope is coming across on camera. After some minor cleanup, I move on to Pooogie himself. I spent some time off camera trying to find a good mix of beige and red to get a nice flesh tone.
The nearest thing in nature to the flesh of a man is the flesh of a pig. Hey, huh? That's right.
Right you are, Bill. Right you are. Now, I'll admit, this doesn't pick up very well on camera for some reason, but I am happy with the color, and I continue to use it for the whole head, the feet, and the tail. The buttons get a nice pale yellow, and the threads I decided to make pink. Not really sure what they're supposed to be, but I thought this looked good, so I went with it. Then I used that same pink for the bow. Looking good. It's giving off an almost Easter vibe, I think. The hooves are just a simple brown.
It's my hooves! It's my hooves! Cloppity clop! Listen to them! Cloppity clop!
Enough said. And now for the scariest part. Adding the blush. I didn't get much of this on film, mostly because I thought I really screwed up. It honestly looked like he was beat up or got shot in the face for a while there. Thankfully though, after a hefty bit of blending, I was able to knock it down to something that looked more natural. This was definitely a crisis averted moment for me, not gonna lie. Finally happy with how the nose turned out, I moved on to the ears, which again started out rough, but was saved by excessive blending. I think I'm getting the hang of this now. I hope. Starting to feel more confident in the process, I move on to the cheeks. I think they look pretty good in the end. So now there's one thing left. The thing that made me question this sculpt for far too long. Those eyes. I may have been unsure of how this sculpt came out this whole time, but the more I added, the better they looked as a whole package. So I think it's time to paint them and seal the deal.
Lifeless eyes, black eyes like a doll's eyes.
Not to toot my own horn here too much, but I think I can rest easy now. Just adding that one little bit of color turned me around on this sculpt completely. I guess it just goes to show you really can't judge the quality of a sculpt until all the pieces are firmly in place. They say that every sculpt has a eureka moment, and painting the eyes was mine for sure. Yup, that's a POOGIE alright.
There he is!
For consistency's sake, I then add the blush style I used on the face to the legs and the tail. They just wouldn't have looked right if I didn't. And not that you'll see it or even notice, I also painted the inner ears. Nothing crazy, just a flat light pink. It was a pain to get to it. I'll just let the natural shadows take it from here. And for one last little touch, I paint a little light reflection on each eye so that this way it'll have depth regardless of the light source or setting. And there you have it, POOGIE from Monster Hunter World. All in all, I'm happy with it regardless of all the ups and downs, and believe me, there were plenty. This was quite the emotional roller coaster for something that I thought would have been incredibly simple. I mean, it's no Magnamalo spikes or anything like that, but there sure was a lot of uncertainty going into this. Lots of points where I thought, did I screw this up, or should I just start over? But I pushed through it, and I'm glad that I did. This was a ton of fun to put together, and I couldn't be happier with the end result. But I think that'll do it for today. Let's roll some glamour shots and get on out of here. And that's another quest complete. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to like that smash button and subscribe and all that jazz. Let me know what you thought down in the comments and let me know what you'd like to see me sculpt in the future. I hope to see you all then. I'm gonna get on out of here. And as always, happy sculpting.